I'll call this meeting to order. Is 1:04. Thank you, everybody, for participating. And Shelley is going to do the roll call.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? This is Gwendolyn.
Yes. Hey, Gwendolyn. We're just starting with the roll call. Kylie Goslin?
I'm here.
Tim Hodges? I think he's on. Oh. Stella Mascaro Bruno?
Here.
Franklin Perry?
I'm here, present.
Pepper Bates? Gwendolyn Thames?
Present.
And Carla Weil?
Here.
I just want to remind you that the meeting is being recorded, so if you can just say your name before you speak.
We have the agenda, 2 items on the agenda. The consideration of potential revisions to the low-income housing tax credit qualified allocation plan and related revisions to the CHFA procedures. So
make sure everything is turned up. Oh.
So, Nandini, do you want to proceed?
Sure. We're ready to proceed. Perry Nash is going to start it up for us, and then we'll start the discussion.
Sure. So I wanted to just kind of go over very high level the changes that we are presenting in the red line QAP that you have in your packages. We had talked last in January about making minor changes in this 2020 QAP, which we've done. It looks like there might be a lot of change. We've rearranged considerably to make it easier to read and to be more clear and efficient for the applicants and the staff. So we have maintained the same priority goals as we've had in the past with rental affordability, the financial feasibility and sustainability, local impact, opportunity characteristics, the qualifications and experience of the development teams, and the SSHP priorities. That has not changed. What we've done is made changes that are potentially positive or neutral to the development community who likely have applications well underway. There are some technical changes. I'll mention those first, and that is really to introduce a list of governing authority as opposed to having it, here and there throughout the QAP. And we've made an adjustment, as I think we talked about in January, to the area median income levels, moving from 25% to 30%, which is in keeping with the state's other programs and the federal programs. And then we also thought about what folks were asking when they were talking in their comments last fall, and we've made some changes to the points items, which I will get into very shortly. We also took some language that was operational in nature from the LIHTC procedures and moved that into the QAP. So it's the second kind of change we made. That is what impacts the change on the LIHTC procedures. It's just moving things, a couple of things, into the QAP. And then as far as the points items go, we maintained the same general allotment of points percentage-wise, but we made some additional criteria that would enable applicants to achieve preservation points, which hasn't usually happened before. We've widened the pool a little bit. And this is also in response to what we've heard from developers who say we're not able to meet that narrow definition you have, so we've expanded that a bit. Now it should be more achievable. We've also taken out the 90% drawing de facto requirement because people felt it was a requirement. The points level was so high, so we reduced the points. It's down to 1 point. Cost effectiveness hard costs used to have to be related to the 90% drawings. That's no longer required. The points are reduced, appropriately from 3 to 2 points. And then, again, I'm going very quickly at a high level. I know Franklin only has a half an hour with us, and this is just an overall summary, and then we can walk through. The sustainable design measures have been expanded to include other types of energy efficiency measures that the community has been looking for. And it also recognizes that passive house is not the only wonderful opportunity for energy efficiency. So if the points are reduced for passive house by 1, and it's in line with LEED, which is the same point opportunity, because that's another very effective energy efficiency measure. And then we've also introduced the concept of turnkey developer partner or a consultant who could help a new applicant, somebody who has not had any LIHTC experience, gain access to the program. This way they can apply, but they've got someone who is fully experienced and they could earn points based on their turnkey partner's experience. I'm happy to go through from the beginning, but I wanted you all to have that overview, and we could see maybe from the start where the changes occur, and if you have particular questions about anything, we can then discuss, if that makes sense to you.
Any questions? I think you can continue, Terry.
Okay. So if you have you see in front of you is the red line, and I think that most folks have that on their iPads as well. I wanted to just point out that, again, that while it may look like there's a lot of changes, because of the movement of different criteria, it is kind of dramatic looking, but there are not really a lot. But starting from the beginning, and I'm doing the same thing. We took a look at the threshold requirements, and one of the things that we thought would bring greater efficiency both to the staff reviewers and to the applicant is to really clarify what we mean by threshold. So there's 3 different components of threshold. You have your basic threshold requirements that everybody has to do. Policy goals. You have to achieve some specific policy goals. These are laid out in the C&D policy plan on OPM's website, and we've highlighted the housing aspects as we do every year. These are the same as we've typically done in the past. It's just moved to say, listen, if basic threshold, you have to meet some policy goals. After that, there is I'm doing the same thing, scrolling down. We've taken out some of the things that don't really need to be repeated because they're in the code. And we come to financial feasibility. So this was to describe what we mean exactly when we're saying you have to have your completed application. What does that mean? Well, we talked about this is where the LIHTC language, procedures language comes in. We talked about your credit ask can't be more than a certain amount per unit or a certain amount per development. That language used to be in the procedures and was a little bit lost, I think, in many cases when people were hunting around trying to find where that language may exist. We thought it was clear because we'd looked at it, staff had looked at it so many different times and we knew it was there, but a new applicant or somebody unfamiliar might not necessarily find it. So we have everything now more cleanly laid out. So in the population component cap, people are typically asking for waivers. So we had set an amount of $30,000, which was previously the high limit. So now you don't need to ask for a waiver. You're just going up to $30,000 times the number of LIHTC program qualified units. That's it. And then per development, we set a fixed amount too because people were having difficulty with the population component and struggling a little bit. So just make it simple, set a number. It's $1.5 million in general, provided, however, if there is a need to meet the goals and purposes of the QAP, then the Chief Executive Officer would have the ability to raise that to up to $1.725 million.
Can I speak to that a little bit, just to give a little bit more color? So in the last few years, there has been a per unit cap on the credits, as well as a per project cap. The per project cap used to be a formula. It said something like 20% of the annual credit ceiling. I think formulas are great, but they don't always give a lot of clarity. They're hard to, figure out what does that mean? What is that number, right? So we wanted to fix that. So what we're proposing is the following. The per unit cap used to be set at $27,500 per unit, but allowed developers to seek waivers up to $30,000 per unit. What we did was go back, and I don't know if you remember this, but we had a lot of discussion around the board wanting to understand the reason to provide waivers and whether or not the waivers were, based on certain fixed criteria or, sort of wanted to understand the justification for providing those waivers. And what we've realized is that as time has gone on, more and more of the applications, like over 60% of the applications in the last 3 years, have sought waivers in excess of $27,500 a unit. Part of that is directly related to the fact that, DOH state funding has dropped from what used to be $6 million a project to $4 million a project. So, many more projects were now seeking a waiver to go up to $30,000 a unit. So what I can tell you about it is that by going to $30,000 a unit, we believe that we're just resetting the expectation based on where we think applications are coming in anyway, and we don't believe that we're really taking a big step in the direction that is going to take us away from kind of making sure things are cost effective, because we feel like that's where they were headed. In addition, we believe that this change is going to be mitigated by what we're proposing is a cap on the total per project of $1.5 million. So what I was saying earlier was that the cap used to be 20% of the ceiling. That worked out to be around $2 million per project. When we took a look at the neighboring states, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, that is far richer than a lot of other states in the Northeast are providing in terms of a per project cap. So what we did was we looked back at the last 3 years and we said, how many applications sought above $1.5 million and how many of them received over $1.5 million. So in this last round that we just approved, there was one award out of 7 that exceeded $1.5 million in the award. In the last 3 years, about 30% of the applications requested over $1.5 million, 37%, and about 30% of the awards exceeded $1.5 million. So, again, that's on average. We understand that this may affect deals in the pipeline. So we're trying to balance kind of, the credit is a valuable resource. We want to maintain a fair amount of, we want to maintain cost effectiveness. We want to encourage it. We want to make sure we're in line with other states near us, to the extent that matters. So what we're proposing, I think, is a fairly decent compromise. We're allowing up to $30,000 a unit. because that's where things were going. We're capping it at $1.5 million, allowing some flexibility. Again, a proposal. I'm happy to, hear your reactions.
Nandini, it's Tim Hodges. That was incredibly helpful background. It was the one thing that I kind of homed in on when I was reading through this, trying to understand why we were doing it. So what I think you and your team have done has been really good. It's been it can be obviously justified and very useful and to hear that. Very good explanation. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Nandini, this is Lisa. You mentioned that our costs seem to run higher even than others in the Northeast. Can you speak to that?
No, I'm not suggesting that our costs are running higher. I was suggesting that our total per project cap was significantly higher than other states in the Northeast. It may or may not have to do with project costs. In other words, if you look at our per unit costs of the projects that we build, they're, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of between $200,000 and $300,000 per unit. But that doesn't include, higher cost areas, in different, Fairfield County, for example, which may be closer to $350 or $400. So, compare that to Massachusetts. I mean, we're not running higher than that, than that. But my point is that our per unit, our per project cap it is higher than our neighboring states, and that got us thinking about whether that actually made sense, given that we're a much smaller state and that our total ceiling is significantly smaller than Massachusetts, right?
This is Carla. Could it also, though, be because of other resources available in those other states that we don't have in terms of other subsidies for the projects?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, you're right. I mean, there's no way to go back and I mean, there probably is a way to go back and figure that out, but it would probably take a while.
Hi, I can add a little bit to that, Carla.
Okay, great.
I did a little research, and actually, we in Connecticut, we're having a lot more subsidy than a lot of other states. And they have, what they do have, in Massachusetts, for example, equity into projects and tax credits, not mean equity on the tax credit, but equity of the developers. So they have requirements to have at least a 5% or a 10%. So they bring money to the table. Many of our projects, developers don't bring anything to the table but the selling of the tax credit. That's the equity that they call a contribution. Some of the nonprofits do, they defer the developer fee. Most of them do the defer developer fee. So that's one of the big issues. In Colorado also, I think I was talking to a couple of people in one of the conferences that I went. We actually have the higher subsidy. And it might be some loans or other ways that they have, but that's also another kind of research that probably Masuda will get into as she continues working with us in this and trying to see how we can leverage some resources and see other programs that can help us out.
So I think the bottom line is, if we make this change, of course, the public's going to have their own opinion about it, but if we make this change, we don't believe we're going to be hurting, significant. Given our percentages of applications that have received any award over $1.5 million, we believe we should be good with 80 or 90% of the applicants and the awards that we've seen to date in the last 3 years. Anyway, it's hard to go back a lot longer, only because the QAP has changed and the per unit cap has gone up, and so. It's hard to compare apples to apples when you're talking about things where the QAP was significantly different and points were different. So that's kind of the background for, you know, why we're proposing these particular changes here. So,
any other questions? Terry, continue on.
Okay. So, let's see. We've also asked, and to your point, we've asked that the applicants include an appropriate sizing of debt and credit. We've said this in a different way before in prior QAPs. It's just highlighted under financial feasibility, so folks will understand that this is something that's very important. Size the debt appropriately, minimize the need for scarce resources. Let's see. There's additional clarity provided for what we mean by environmental site assessments. The industry standard requires that they be fresh. So 6 months, they could be refreshed, but you can't...
Could you scroll up, Shelley? Sorry. Would you scroll up to, I think it's earlier in the threshold section, so if you go up to...
Page 15.
There we go, number 3, site control environmental site assessment. So there we go.
I'm sorry, yeah, I just wanted to point that out too, because that was another question that we had from applicants from time to time about, you know, my environmental site assessment is 9 months old, that should be fine, and really the industry standard is 6 months old, so if it's less than a year, you can refresh it. If it's older than a year, you need to redo it. This is just putting it out to make sure that folks understand it's not buried in a different area. So these are upfront things that folks need to do in their application.
So for clarification, if I have a phase 1 environmental report and it's 9 months and I'm going to submit the application, I can do that? Or I have to redo?
If it's older than 6 months, you just need to get a refresh from your consultant, the LEP who did your environmental site assessment. So that's different than going out and getting a whole new environmental site assessment done. But it does need to be like within 6 months of the application. So if you were at 9 months...
I think that my recommendation for this, because it's an application within a year, is acceptable. I did look at New York, and New York affects a year or within a year, because once they submit, let's say it's 9 months, and you ask them to update it, they still have to pay for it, and then you wait for 3 to 4 months before you get a yay or nay from the application. At that time, they will have to update it again. So it's just how we can manage cost efficiency too. So we talked about before is to live in it within a year should be acceptable for an application. And then once, if they get a credit, they have to update it because it's older than a year. Okay. That's my comments. I don't know anybody else who wants to chime in.
Commissioner, this is Masuda. If I could chime in, please. So what we're proposing here is really as industry standards, so ASTM standards. This is what's required, and all we're doing is simply putting the industry standard for applicants. So we don't feel that it's an issue, but certainly if there's comments during the public comment period, we can certainly come back and revisit. But again, all we're restating is the industry standard.
Yeah, as I said, on the New York, they affect that. So we'll see what people made the comments on the public comments. But we will revisit that if that's the case.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay.
Okay, then everything that follows was previously in the QAP in this particular section. So I'm going down to, I want to say it's page 17. We talked about the population component. We talked about the debt sizing. And then section C, which starts on page 18. And this also is just to introduce the concept of the points in the 9% round, describing that we are maintaining in this QAP the two classifications that we've previously used, the public housing or the general housing classes, and describes those in the same way we did before, and it summarizes the points. So as we get into the points, on page 19, you'll see where we've made the few minor changes. The technical changes. There's some clarifying language under supportive housing in that area, saying, rather than saying evidence, we just need to see something. What's the Daisy, sorry. I'm losing my page, yeah. We just need a description of the funding sources and the budget that's proposed, and ideally that'll make it simpler for folks. The 30% that I had mentioned earlier, aligning up with the state and federal programs, applies to the next 2 point categories, households above or below. And then I don't think that's anything too different. This preserved at-risk affordable housing, we received comments, I think, every year for the past couple of years where folks were saying it's just too narrow a definition. We're not able to use this to rehab our development, and it really sorely needs it. So this was an effort to accommodate those requests. We've expanded the definition to include, it's an at-risk for expiring use, yes, but it also may have identified substantial rehab costs. Often we see a need that's in excess of $50,000 per unit. This is what we do here. And at least 75% of the units in the development have a federal project-based rental assistance. And particularly for buildings that placed in service some years ago, there's a real need for some rehab work, and a lot of folks haven't been able to access these points. So we moved it to introduce new language and to keep it to 4 points. There's no opportunity for moderate rehab. This is for substantial rehab to preserve at-risk housing. Okay. After that, we added just that we have a acknowledgement of guidelines for resident service coordinators. We just added that language. It's just a technicality for documentation for folks. And then on the next page, we start to talk about the financial efficiency and sustainability incentives. And this is where, as you go back up, we had the cost used to be tied to the 90% complete drawings, and since we've made an effort to reduce that, what was perceived as a burden for a lot of folks when they were applying, we've removed that 90% level requirement for the hard cost points and reduced the points from 3 to 2 for the maximum that could be gained here. And that's tied to, as you can scroll down, Sean, the 90%. A little further. This is just technical language. This one here, E. So the building plans and specs, a little bit higher up, you'll see that we reduced the points from 3 to 1. And this is recognizing that there are developers who have their projects in the works already. We had talked about potentially eliminating this altogether, but didn't want to upend things completely, and instead reduce it to 1 point. Some folks may still have it, some folks won't, and we'll hear what the comments are in regards to this adjustment. I think people will be happy about it. Sustainable design was another area where we received a lot of comments, both for and against. There's the passive house industry that's really very excited about keeping passive house and making it the penultimate energy efficiency measure. And then there's a lot of other folks also in the energy efficiency industry, but developers as well, saying there's a lot of other opportunities to achieve what we need to without going as far as passive house, especially when we're doing a rehab or a smaller development that can't really achieve passive house. So we've reduced the points for passive house, and we've introduced some other measures. Our Masuda's group has been very thoughtful about describing the different types of energy efficiency measures that are industry standard, and that would be eligible for receiving points. So there's Energy Star, there's LEED, Enterprise Green Communities, Zero Energy Ready Home certifications, and passive house as well. But passive house is no longer like the, it's added to points all the way up to, I think it was 7 last year. It's 4 points now, and it's the same as the 4 points for the earlier certification, recognizing that they are equally effective. Those two changes were the two biggest changes that we had made in the point structure. And then in general, under the next area,
Terry, this is Lisa. I just want to thank you for that. I think we've discussed a lot over the last couple of years, passive house, and I think that's a good change. So many thanks to you and Masuda and your team.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay. And we provided some clarity under the COD points area. It's a little bit farther down in the same category, just because there was some confusion about what does it mean to have a commercial component in your building, and we didn't want to, leave that so vague. So we've added the language that elevates a unit on a particular floor to being a commercial unit. So, opportunity characteristics is the next area where we've made some, it looks like there's a lot of red, but it's the same as we had last year while we wait on the new mapping tool that will be used by both DOH and CHFA. So we will have one for next year that we'll be able to introduce and use in all of our funding rounds, and the QAP in particular, so that we mirror, each agency is mirroring the same type of opportunity mapping tool. Right now, we're still using Policy Map and the same criteria we had before. Again, this recognizes that folks have their sites picked out and well underway. Their work is in progress, and to make a dramatic change at this point would be a little bit onerous. So this is staying as it is, and the new mapping tool is still in development. I think they finalized, but we haven't had a meeting of the agencies to finalize it amongst ourselves. If I'm not mistaken, because that's where we stand.
Hey, can I ask about, just to go back for a second, on the language change in terms of commercial? Is that a I'm sorry I didn't catch it before, but why the specific square footage and the 10%?
There was because there's some confusion at times, and there have been applicants that are looking to earn points in this category for uses that don't rise to the spirit of the commercial use we're looking for. So where we might have thought that, and we spelled it out, saying pharmacies, restaurants, little shops, something that benefits the community, like an amendment for the community, we would see folks stretching that a little bit. And so there was not a real understanding. What do you mean by commercial space? So our Masuda's group and our technical services folks have identified this is the area, the square footage, 10% of the building area on the particular floor. These are measures that are recognized in the industry as meeting a different level. This is now the commercial, not the residential space. So, for example, if you had a small office for your resident service coordinator to meet with residents, that's not the same thing as having an office on the floor that you're renting to a therapist who's going to see clients in the community and in the building and wherever. You know, anybody from the community could come and visit that individual. You know, so we're trying to define in still a broad way what we're talking about by commercial space. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate that. And do we have any sense of the impact, or have you not done that analysis? Not a huge deal, just curious.
I don't think that in the commercial space that we've recognized, I don't think it's anything less than that. I don't know, Masuda, if you have any, some just based on last year's application.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to have either Deb or Jennifer weigh in. I know, Deb, do you want to start? Because you've seen quite a few applications that come in with commercial space.
Sure. So what we saw last year was somebody proposing a small 120 square foot space as a commercial amenity for the neighborhood. And considering that was about the size of my office in the building, we didn't feel that that rose to the spirit of what this was trying to accomplish for a neighborhood amenity. When questioned, the developer said he thought it could serve as an office for a bookkeeper. But again, that's not really an amenity for the neighborhood to take advantage of. So we didn't feel that met the spirit. And I think 500 was probably, I think the other ones we did award points for were probably over 500 square feet.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. Okay, and then on page 26, the Qualifications and Experience category, we've introduced the concept here of the turnkey developer applicant so that folks who are new to the LIHTC program will have an opportunity to partner with somebody who has the requisite experience, and they would be able to apply. We've heard in the past from commenters in the industry that said, you know, how do you get in? You can't get in. You have to have experience to apply. If you don't have an application ever, how are you going to get in? So this is an opportunity, and I think a good one, so that people can form a partnership, get the requisite experience. This partner would be with them throughout the whole process. So we would be assured of the experience that's necessary to move a complex deal forward, and then they would have an experienced property manager for operations. That, I think, is a syndicator desire, even more so than ours. So we want to just make sure that people have an opportunity. And so that's why you see this new language here about the turnkey development partner. Hopefully people will be happy about that, because it gives, you know, a lot of people an opportunity, both the partners and the applicants.
This is Kylie. Can I ask just a question about this one?
Sure.
One, just curious, I know this was born out of probably the conversation this year, but likely also conversations with, about the QAP in the past, as you described, trying to get developers who may want to break into this field, having more of an even playing field to do that. And potentially those folks are also ones doing smaller projects, which we talked about wanting to be able to see more of, particularly in urban areas. But I think my first question was just about what other states are doing in this area. Do other states have, did we look into whether there's also a prioritization for experience? What's the norm there? And then my second question was just, how do you all expect this to play out in practice? I'm assuming that folks would be splitting development fees in this case, and wondering if that's going to make it feasible or not for some of the smaller folks to break in to that field.
Kylie, this is Masuda. I would like to respond to your question. So the language that's proposed here actually came out of Colorado's QAP, and I can give you a little bit of background on why that was done. And it was in Colorado would receive very similar feedback that tax credit program only allowed experienced and sophisticated developers to participate in the program, and as a result, smaller nonprofits, smaller housing authorities, just developers in general could not access tax credits. So by coming in as a turnkey developer or as a turnkey partner, what they're doing is they're bringing their tax credit experience, they're building the development, and then, they agree on whatever the terms are as far as fee arrangement, when that development is going to get turned over back to the primary sponsor. But it is a way to get developments off the ground, and also a great opportunity for the smaller developers to gain the experience. This is something that Colorado has done for a few years now, and it's a really successful program because particularly in rural areas of the state, again, a lot of those smaller developers were just shut out, and so this allowed some of the urban developers to come in, even out-of-state developers, to partner and get those tax credit developments off the ground. But again, the allocating agency is not involved or a party to their agreement. This is just purely to bring that experience into the development.
I'm sorry, this is Tim. I think that's part of Kylie's point, though, and something that we should. We're not going to resolve it, but the fact is that there are a number of, and I've heard at least a couple experiences where you have smaller not-for-profit organizations partnering, and they aren't getting, while they may be getting the experience, they're not getting the money, right? And so you've got them spending as much, if not more, time working on projects like this, but aren't getting the funding that they need in order to make it actually work for them, make it feasible for them to actually do the project. So I'm not sure how we resolve it. I suppose we have to go through it a couple of years to understand, but I think that is a concern for some nonprofits who are trying to get in and actually not getting paid.
Tim, thank you. That's a very good point, and I think it's a really good opportunity for TA. In my previous experience, I partnered with a smaller nonprofit, especially the one that was in Clinton, Debbie, you were involved on that. And we divided the developer fee. They did a lot of the work for 4 years, and then they invited us because we had a capacity. And our developer fee was 60-40 because we weren't just doing the developments, but we were going also to be doing the property management. And they were able to raise some money. It's an opportunity for them because they wanted to keep, even if they didn't want to be a developer, a property managers, but they wanted to continue with the community involvement and trying to get more development in the area. So, but it needs to be a little more education and technical assistance, I think, to the nonprofits and see how they can partner, even with consultants, because this will give an opportunity to consultants also to do that. But there should be an alliance and there should be a win-win situation. But I'm hearing you, and I'm putting that into our TA proposal plan that we have.
Thank you.
Can I jump in here? This is Gwendolyn James, and I realize I'm new to a lot of this I think this is my first task force meeting, so trying to get up to speed. But on the point about, nonprofits and smaller developers, particularly in urban communities, I'm just wondering, from a TA perspective, as you said, Chairman, is there an opportunity to really kind of provide, again, and I'm not making the assumption that, CHFA doesn't do this already, but I think it's important that, we are providing a level of TA education to particularly minority communities and minority developers, and helping them understand this process and understanding how to access these developments. So again, I just point that out there from an inclusion perspective.
Yes, and Deputy Commissioner, we DOH, on the DOH role, we are going to be working in some neighborhood revitalization, which is in education and resources to work with some of the nonprofits. So that's another plan on the other side of the shop.
I just have one quick question. This is Lisa. Is the term of art turnkey understood consistently in the same way across the industry?
I think in some states it might be called joint ventures. In Colorado, it was described as turnkey, developer, partner, and we would be adding that to the glossary that we maintain so that folks can get exactly what that means if there's any doubt. Okay.
Thank you.
That's helpful because in my past experience, turnkey is more where somebody does everything and turns the entire thing over to the other party at the end, which doesn't include that sort of training that seems to be implicit in this process.
Yes. Maybe we should change the language to joint venture or something like that. Because if that's turnkey, it sounds more like a for-profit developer comes in, do some work, and leave.
I think that's exactly right. Even if that is the understanding in Colorado, if we haven't used it the way that I think we're all hoping to see that play out here, maybe we do need to use different language.
Yeah, I like the joint venture language.
Yeah. To go to what Commissioner said just now, would we envision that the technical assistance would be that in fact that an awardee under this type of venture would receive the TA funds as a result of this award? Like, how would that work? Would that be coordinated between DOH and CHFA in a way that provided seamless assistance?
So I think, first of all, we're probably going to have to educate and to promote something like this with our nonprofit. And you guys CHFA has been doing a good job with the technical assistance with LIHTC, where they were doing, those were more for the small towns, but it's kind of something like that we can also do with the nonprofits. I'm looking at Diane because you guys were working on that. So this is kind of another way that we can amplify that program.
This is Kylie. Just a quick follow-up question, and thank you, Tim, for much more articulately clarifying my question than I did a job of myself. On the point, so at the end of this, assuming there's these joint venture projects, for purposes of future calculations, would both parties get a point for that project, or would it be a lead partner? Sort of how would that work?
So in essence, someone with no experience would, and they applied by themselves, would miss out on this point opportunity. They wouldn't have LIHTC programs behind them to say, oh, we've done more than 6, or we've had more than 3 years. So they don't have any of that opportunity. So their partner, presumably, would be able to score in this area. They say they form a joint venture with someone who has more than 6 years of experience, as well as more than 6 projects. They would get the maximum 5 points for their partner, because it's a joint venture. It's considered one applicant. Does that make sense, Kylie? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
All right.
Any other questions? I think you can continue, Terry.
Okay, thank you. So the other point change was not points, it's another clarification in the SSHP development, farther down just a little bit right there. The annual LIHTC needs, we've had, spelled out. In other places we don't, so that's why it's the same number, the 1.2 million. It's just...
Can you scroll up, Shelley?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's no change here. It's still 3 points for the SSHP, and we removed the, 2019 application year kind of language that came earlier, and we're just using the same 1.2 million. So there's no change here. And underneath, it talks about the 4% deals, and it provides a little bit more clarity that they have to follow the threshold requirements and, be able to, as you see, meet certain criteria. It's just clearer language, making it sure that we used to say up to section such and such, and now it's saying it's basic threshold requirements. Okay. Is there anything else key in this area? Debt sizing, it again reminds folks that they have to, if you're applying for 4%, you still need to make sure that you're appropriately sizing the debt with your request for the credit. Compliance monitoring hasn't changed entirely, just reminds people that when there's new IRS guidance, we will apply that, and when we have points awards for certain criteria that the applicant has to certify they're still maintaining that criteria when they're in operation. They didn't just drop it. That's really it for the changes that are past the point. This is the version of the QAP that we would be presenting to the board at the end of the month, so that ideally it goes for public comment and we'll hear back, what folks are thinking in terms of, the changes that I mentioned in the points and anything that, especially the limits to the credits, and see what people think. I had made a couple notes of things that this body would like to see different, and when we can either make those changes before or after the public comment period, but ideally, if we go out for a public comment period with this document and have made no changes to it, and nobody says anything about, turnkey, let's say, and we didn't make the change to joint venture, changing it after that may require another public comment period. So it would be great if we could button up whatever we're doing today is what's going to go out for public comment after the board authorizes that at the end of the month, if that makes sense. And I only said really the three things. The application should be able to, an applicant should be able to submit an environmental site assessment that's, within a year before it updates it. That was one thing. We might need to address the developer fee parity when there's the developer partnership in some way. We may need to articulate that if it's not happening already in the industry. But it sounded like that might not necessarily need to be spelled out. And then turnkey, we may need to change that language to joint venture.
So any comments from the group in addition to the three comments? So do you want us to make those changes now so that we can approve these to go to the board?
Well, that's what I'm wondering. Is this something that you all feel strongly about any of those topics that we should change this red line? Because when we go to the board at the end of the month and have authorization to go out for public comment, we'd like to have exactly what you want to see go out for public comment so that we're not making changes after the fact. You know what I mean?
So do you all agree to the joint venture so we can change the language? That should be simple.
Shayla, can I just make a motion to make all of those changes? Is that what we need, is a motion and a vote?
Do we need to do that?
Yeah, Terry? I don't think we vote. I don't think we have to vote. I don't think so. But I think we do have to come to some consensus.
We have to agree to the languages, and then do we bring it to the board? So right now there are three things that we were talking about. One was on the environmental. For the application purposes, I was suggesting to do it within a year, and then if somebody gets the award, then they can update it before closing. Should be within 6 months. Totally agree with that. I don't know how you guys feel about that. And as a developer, I know that you wait, you submit, you pay for the environmental phase one, then you have to pay within a year. And if you do the update, and then you wait for another 4 to 5 months to know that you're going to that you get the award, then for closing, you have to have it updated again. So it's just updating and updating. So once it's, you know that you have the credits, and then you're going to close, and you'll have to update it for that closing.
I agree with that position, Selah. I think that would be a positive change.
Agree.
I agree as well.
Ditto.
I'm fine
Okay.
with it.
Thank you. And then what was the other change, Terry?
Changing it from turnkey to joint venture, and that seemed to be what everybody liked and preferred, so we can make that change. But there was the concern that we may need to address the developer fee parity, or to make sure that the nonprofit or the inexperienced applicant isn't losing out on the developer fee. In other words, we don't want to be. Do we need to address that, or just something that?
No, I think that if you change it to joint venture, I think it gives more meaning that there's going to be a joint benefit too, instead of a turnkey.
Okay.
And then we'll go with the CA. What do you guys think? Yeah, okay, good.
Good, thank you. Is there anything else? This would be okay to go then.
Is anybody? You all okay? Nod your head.
Yes.
Yes. Everybody is okay with it. If we don't have to make any motions, or do we do have to prove the notes from the previous meeting?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, and one other thing, if I may. The LIHTC red line is also, it's in your package, and it will be going at the end of the month too. And as long as there's no comments on that, and again, there's just those moving language from there to the QAP. Did anybody have any questions about those changes, or if that's okay to go too? We'll just move those to the board.
Terry, is the red line going to go to the board?
Yes. Actually,
Okay.
what we usually give is the red line and the accepted version. Sometimes it's easier to just read the clean one.
Yeah, I would propose that. I'd like to see the red line in whatever. It'd be a lot easier to read.
Exactly. So usually we send you the red line, the accepted version, and there'll be a memo that describes essentially the changes that occurred. So you'll have all that information, but you're right. I need to see the clean version myself. So.
All right. So can we have a motion to approve the January 30th, 2020 as low-income housing tax rate QAP task force meeting? Wow, that was January 30th.
I know.
Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second, Carla? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
I just would abstain for the record because I wasn't at that meeting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Glenn.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
No, anything else?
I just had one final question. At our January meeting, we had talked fairly extensively about the next turn of this next year, and about how this year we would make more of these sort of minor changes that needed to get made, but talk about more of a full-throated reorganization and rewrite next year. And we also talked about the possibility of creating a 2-year cycle for the QAP moving forward. It wasn't mentioned as part of the body of the QAP edits, which I didn't expect it to be. But in terms of messaging that, I was wondering if there's any thought about doing that, about not doing that, whether it's appropriate or not. My concern was just for purposes of developers, giving them some heads up that larger changes may be coming for the next round, so that they can plan for that or understand that. If that's what we all intend,
We did put out an e-blast. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No. I think that is important. I just, Nandini, have you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the reason it's not on the body of the QAP is because it just, you know, we got some feedback from, we've been working with the consultant, the gentleman that, you know, has done extensive work with other housing finance agencies and currently works for a consultant that has done a lot of work on, you know, the LIHTC program nationwide. And basically, some of these changes that you see here with respect to reorganization are changes that we think that make our QAP a lot easier to read. And so in keeping with the spirit of that, we've decided not to have any sort of introduction at the beginning that we may have to change in a year. But I do agree with you that I think we will need to message to the developer community as to what we intend, if that is what we intend. So, you know, I'm happy to get your feedback. Perhaps mid-January, we had put something on the website that gave the development community a heads up that, you know, this year was going to be, not as extensive as next year's QAP may involve. And so if that is still your intention, we can certainly re-up that notice once we get board approval and we have something that can go out for public comment. That would be the approach I would take. The other approach could be that we have, as Tim had suggested a couple months ago, having more public input in person, if we could do that, or perhaps via GoToMeeting or Zoom or whatever. And then, you know, in light of that type of meeting, we could make an announcement, you know, that says something like we're seeking your input to try to inform our policies for 2021 and beyond. Something like that.
Hi, it's Tim. I thought what I read in Terry's memo, and maybe I read it earlier, so that there was some reference to that about working throughout the year. Is that accurate, Terry?
Yes.
I thought I had read that. So I will go back to my original comments from January where I said, you know, I would certainly be interested and willing to be involved in meetings throughout the year because I think it's important. I don't believe that we should wait until, you know, the end of the year. I think we should be planning, and I would, given everything that's happening now, I would kind of leave it to you guys to give us recommendations on how we could do that. But my hope would be that we would put something out now, and then making sure that we inform the development community as well as everyone else that we're going to be working on it throughout the year. Their input is important, particularly for all those folks who don't believe that, you know, we're doing as good a job as we could. They have an opportunity to have input, and so either, you know, put up or shut up.
I think, we don't need to put anything on the QAP. It's just a message when we post it for public hearing that we will include that and agree, Tim, we should start right away. Once we start, after we publicize this, then we should come up with a plan in how we're moving forward for the next QAP. So I think that we all agree with that, and the staff will make sure that happens. Yep. And any other comments before we move on? Well, thank you very much to the staff. This has been great, good feedback. That it shows that we have been listening to the developers. There are some compromises. Not everybody's going to be happy, but they, at the end of the day, being consistent and being able to promote affordable housing is the ultimate goal. So thank you very much. Happy Mother's Day to those moms that are on the video.
Happy Mother's Day.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye.